Hello, welcome to my home office. Today we are going to continue with chapter 4 and we are at passage 5. As usual, the first thing I'd like you to do is read it over and decide if it's an argument or not. So pause the video, decide, and then start the video again when you have an answer. Okay, so what do you think? I think this is an argument. And if you thought it was an argument too, I am super psyched because there is something different about this passage, unlike any passage or at least any argument that we've seen so far. I would like you to take a look at the passage and see if you can see what sets this argument apart from any other argument that we've examined up until now. So, as usual, pause the video and start again when you have an answer. Okay, so what did you decide? This argument has no inference indicator expressions, right? Take a look. Can you see anything that's like because, anything like that is like therefore? No, you cannot. In real life, arguments don't always have inference indicator expressions that tag individual inferences. In fact, that's why I have been calling those things inference indicator expressions rather than inference expressions or something like that, right? Because all they do is they just say, hey, here's an inference. That inference can still be there even without a word to indicate it. So if you saw that this was an argument, even though it doesn't have words like therefore and because, pat yourself on the back, because what that means is you are kind of subconsciously supplying those words, and that's exactly what you want to be doing. Those words are kind of like training wheels on a bike. Not quite, but kind of. They're like training wheels on a bike insofar as once you really get good at riding a bike, you can lift those training wheels and then they disappear entirely and you don't even know it. They're not entirely like training wheels because they're never going to disappear completely. Most arguments have at least one or two, but each and every individual inference probably won't be tagged with something like therefore and because. All right, so read it over and see if you can decide what the ultimate conclusion is. And I'll give you a moment to think, pause the video, and start again when you're ready. Okay, so what did you decide? I think that this is trying to get us to believe that utilitarianism is correct. So that's the ultimate conclusion. Utilitarianism is the ethical theory that says an action is good if it serves to produce the greatest happiness or the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So let's map this, and we're going to do the procedure that we've been doing up until now. We are going to take a look at individual claims. As soon as we have two, we're going to ask how are they related. We're going to represent that relationship. We're going to do that right away before we even read further. Then we're going to read further, get another claim, and ask how that is related to what has gone before, the little argument unit that we have just mapped. If we encounter an inference indicator expression, which clearly we won't here, we do that first. All right, so why don't you pause the video and decide which two claims would be important and how they would be related, and then start up again when you've decided that. Okay, so what did you have? Let's take a look at the think about it. Is that going to be important? I think not. That is a normal command, so we will not pay attention to that. What about if it's always a good thing to make people happy, then utilitarianism is correct, and it is always a good thing to make people happy. Is that going to be important? I think so. How many individual claims would you get out of that one sentence? Decide that, and pause the video, start again when you've decided. Okay, what did you decide? 1, 2, or 3? 2, right? We never divide around if-then because if-then sentences don't assert their parts. But unless we have a darn good reason not to, we will divide around and. So we have that. Super. Now ask yourself, how are 2 and 3 related to each other? With an arrow or an inference, plus, dependent reasons, or separate. Decide, Pause the video and then come back when you're ready. Okay, what did you decide? And is one of those inference eraser expressions, right? So these are probably going to be added together. So let's add them. 2 plus 3, and I'm on a different computer now, obviously, so it looks different, but you know, it'll do. 2 plus 3. So it's a really good habit to get into once we've added 2 claims together. This is going to be especially the case in chapter 5, to ask what follows from those 2 things. This is because in chapter 5, the thing that follows might not be explicitly stated. And in that case, we'll want to supply it. It will be a missing sub-conclusion or maybe a missing ultimate conclusion. But right now, it's just a good habit. So let's take a look. If it's always a good thing to make people happy, then utilitarianism is correct. It is always a good thing to make people happy. What do you think follows from that? Pause the video, decide, and then start again when you're ready. Okay, what do you think follows? I think that the conclusion follows, right? So I'm going to write the conclusion here. And there we have it. Good. The conclusion follows directly from those. Now let's take a look. Besides, if utilitarianism is correct, then murder would be unethical, and obviously murder is unethical. How many claims would you get out of that? 1, 2, or 3? Pause the video, decide, and then start again when you're ready. Okay, so what did you decide? 2 again, right? If utilitarianism is correct, then murder would be unethical. We don't divide around if-thens because they don't assert their parts. And if-then can be true, even though the individual parts aren't true. Because all the if-then is saying is that if the front part were true, which it might not be, then the back part would be true, which it might not be. And obviously murder is unethical. Super. Okay, so now, how are they going to be related to each other? Well, with a plus again, right? Now, you might wonder, why am I asking how are 4 and 5 going to be related to each other instead of how is 4 going to be related to 2 and 3? There's a couple of reasons. Well, actually, there's one. It's that I know that we are on a different line of reasoning now. And normally, once the author or speaker or reasoner starts another line of reasoning, they're not going to hop back and forth because that's just confusing. And people tend not to do that when they're expressing like completed reasoning. So how do I know that we're in another line of reasoning now? Think about that. See if you can decide how I know that. So pause the video, think, and then once you've decided, start again. Okay, I know that we are in another line of reasoning because, first off, in deciding that 2 and 3 give us 1, we've finished that line of reasoning, right? And I suppose I could maybe be giving reasons for 3 or reasons for 2, but if that were happening, then I would see probably an inference indicator expression, like with 3 because something, and I'm not. Also, there is this word, besides. Besides is not an inference indicator, but it is doing something. Besides often, and I almost want to say always, but I'm not too sure if always might be a little bit strong, but very often. Besides serves to say, here's another line of reasoning. So when you see besides, it's a fair bet that you're going to be in another line of reasoning. So I don't need to worry about how 4 is related to 2 and 3. It won't be. Basically, I'm starting over. So we've decided that 4 and 5 will be related to each other with a plus. 4 plus 5. And we've decided that because, well, that's how and works. And also, it looks like if we puzzle piece it, that works too. What's in common between 4 and 5? Murder being unethical, right? So what's left over? Once we get rid of that stuff, utilitarianism is correct, and that's the ultimate conclusion. So the puzzle piece test very much has 4 and 5 giving us 1, right? Do you see that? Because 4 and 5, the thing that they have in common just is murder is unethical. And the leftover bit then is just this thing from 4, the front part of 4. Okay, but what about this last claim? What about this? Murder simply isn't a moral action. What should we do with that? Why don't you pause the video, think about that, and come back when you've decided. Okay, what did you decide? What should we do with murder simply isn't a moral action? I will ignore it. I'm going to ignore it because it's basically the same as 5. It's a repeated idea. When we number claims, what we are doing is we're saying this is a claim that the reasoning is asserting and using in some way. Either it's the ultimate conclusion, it's a premise, or it's a sub-conclusion. If I were to do this, say, hey, this is 6, what I'm saying is here's a new claim, but it's not a new claim. It was already stated. And sometimes people do restate claims for very good reasons. We can talk about what some of those very good reasons will be right after we finish this argument. But if it's restated, we're not going to want to give it another number because that would imply it's a new claim, and it's not. You have a couple of choices. You can simply not include it, or if that just like offends you, you can give it the same number. That's fine. 5 and 5 again. So why would someone repeat? Well, here, this is not a good repetition. There's no reason for the author to repeat just right after saying, obviously murder is unethical, murder simply isn't a moral action. It's the same claim, different words, same claim. Why is the author doing it? Well, I'm the author, so I can tell you I'm doing it just so I can make this very point. In real life, though, authors do it for different, much better reasons. Suppose, and I'm going to see if I can make this a different color so you know we're dealing with a different, I'm just making this argument up. Suppose an argument looks like this. 2, oh, that's much better. I should do that from now on. Comes from 3, I don't know if it's better or not. It's probably a horse apiece. Horse apiece is an expression that means the same as like 6 to 1, half a dozen to the other, which means the same as it doesn't matter. You might not have heard that. So let's suppose that this argument looks like this. Now, imagine, if you will, that you are reading this argument and mapping it. Can you see there is a claim here in this argument, for whatever these claims are, that the author should probably repeat. See if you can figure out what that claim is. So pause the video, think, and come back when you're ready. Okay, so if I wrote an argument that would be numbered and mapped like this, I would probably want to repeat 2. Because assuming that we're numbering these claims as I've been numbering them, first identifying number 1 and then starting at the top and numbering as we go, the author here says 2, and then says 3, and then says 4, and then says 5, and then says 6, and then says 7, and expects the reader to remember or to somehow see the connection between 2 and 7. If the author does not repeat 2, it's entirely unlikely that the reader just won't see that connection because 2 is pretty far in the rearview mirror at this point, right? So it's a good idea to bring back 2 and to remind your reader or your listener that you have established 2. So you might want to repeat 2 there, right? So that's a good repetition as opposed to this that I did just for teacherly sort of purposes. Okay, so we have mapped this argument. Now let's evaluate it. And as a matter of fact, does it matter? It's not going to freak you out, right, that I forgot to change the color of the pen? Surely not. right? Oh, well, I'm just this kind of person. I like to have consistency. Okay, A, that feels better, and D. Okay. Evaluate inference A, please. Yeah, that's all I'm going to say. Evaluate inference A, pause the video, do that, and then come back when you're ready. Okay, so what did you decide? We're looking at inference A, looking at A. What if I were to say the following? Now, this is not a good criticism of A. So what I'm going to say the criticism, and I want you to figure out why this isn't a good criticism of A. Here's the alleged criticism. That's a horrible inference because it isn't always a good thing to make people happy. What if you have a friend who has a horrible addiction, for instance, and you could make that friend happy by providing them with the substance to which they are addicted? That's clearly not a good thing, right? So it's obvious that it isn't always a good thing to make people unhappy. Okay. See if you can decide why that's not a good criticism of that inference. Pause the video, think, and come back when you're ready. Okay. You see why not? That's a criticism. It's a good criticism. It's a criticism of 3. 3 says it's always a good thing to make people unhappy. No. Okay. So that shows that 3 is bad. But inference A, sorry about that. Inference A is not 3. Okay. So evaluate inference 3, please. I'm sorry, evaluate inference A, please. I'll give you a moment, pause the video, come back when you're ready. Okay. How did you think about it? Did you do the Bob test? I mean, if you did, that's okay. But remember, the Bob test is vulnerable to error, particularly when you know, an argument is of the kind that we are naturally inclined to think is good, even though it isn't good, because we have that sort of innate irrationality. That's when we want to use argument forms or inference forms whenever we can. And when can we? Well, when we have an inference that fits the form. So far, we have the 4 inference forms, right? The 2 good ones and the 2 bad ones that we've just practiced a lot. They all have if-thens in them. So when we see an if-then, it's not a bad idea to see if it fits one of those forms. Does it? Let's see. If, it's always a good thing to make people happy. So that's the front part. Remember, the first thing we're always going to do is take a look at the if-then. That will fix the front part and the back part. It's always a good thing to make people happy. Front part. Utilitarianism is correct. Back part. Now, 3, what is that in terms of fronts and backs? Is it the front? Is it the back? Is it the opposite of the front? Or is it the opposite of the back? Pause and think and come back. Okay, it looks to me like it is just the front. The front here is, it's always a good thing to make people happy. That's what 3 says. So what we have is if front, then back. Then the next claim is front. And what are we concluding? What is utilitarianism is correct? Is that front, back, opposite back? It's back, right? So we have if front, then back, front, therefore back. So we have first identified the form. That's the first thing we want to do. Now, is that form valid or not? There's a couple of ways to figure that out. One way is to just recognize it. And once you've practiced with these forms, you'll just recognize it. The other way is to poodle dog it. So think for a moment, pause, come back when you've decided. It's valid, right? This is, if you are keeping track, oh yeah, good. If you are keeping track, this is modus ponens. This is if front, then back, front, therefore back. It's good. Now, take a moment to evaluate inference B, and I would like you to think about it in the same way. First, identify what form it is. and then use that form to decide whether the inference is good or bad. Pause the video, think, and then come back when you're ready. Okay, what did you decide? We're going to start with the if-then. If utilitarianism is correct, then murder would be unethical. So the front part is utilitarianism is correct. The back part is murder would be unethical, right? Now, 5, murder is unethical. That's the back part, right? Utilitarianism is correct is the front part. So this inference is if front, then back. Front here is utilitarianism is correct. I will make that one color. That's the front. Murder would be unethical. I'll make that another color. Not that color, that's ugly. That's not, oh, I'm running out of colors. Green. Murder is unethical, right? If front, then back, being added to the back to conclude the front. Is that valid or invalid? Well, I happen to remember, but if I didn't, I would use the poodle dog test. I would think, well, what would that be in terms of poodle and dogs? If Max is a poodle, then Max is a dog. Max is a dog, back. Therefore, Max is a poodle. Is that valid? No, because Max could be a dog without being a poodle. So this inference is invalid. The technical term for this is the fallacy of assuming the consequent. There we go. So before we leave this one, on the basis of what we've seen, this 3, this premise being bad, and B, this inference being bad, and A, this inference being good, can we decide whether this argument's good or bad or not? And if so, what is it? Is it good or bad? Pause the video, think, and come back. Okay, so can we decide if it's good or bad? We can. Which is it? It's bad. You see why? The fact that 3 is bad, the fact that 3 is false, means that we are not going to get to the conclusion on that side. This beam breaks. The fact that this inference is weak means we're not going to get to the conclusion on this side. That rope breaks. So this argument is a bad argument. Right? It's a bad argument as a whole. Now, ask yourself, what does that tell us about the conclusion? Does that tell us that the conclusion is true or false, or doesn't it tell us anything? Okay, pause, think, come back. Okay, what did you decide? Doesn't tell us anything, right? Doesn't tell us anything, because a bad argument can certainly have a true conclusion. All we've shown is that this argument has not established that the conclusion is true. The conclusion could be true nonetheless. Okay, great. That's number 5. I will catch you in number 6. See you then. Bye-bye.